Welcome everyone to Layer 6 of the Infinite Business Dynamics Strategic Operating System, Governance and Allocation. This is the critical stage where strategic intent is either funded or silently killed. Here's the core premise you must never forget. Even the most brilliant strategy in the world will fail miserably without the disciplined allocation of three things: money, talent, and time. To stop organizations from spreading their resources too thin, and from endlessly funding legacy zombie projects that drain performance, we created a powerful, disciplined framework called the 6-step Allocation Cascade. Step 1. Strategic themes. You define only 3 to 5 high-level investment domains, for example digital transformation or sustainability leadership. If an initiative doesn't clearly fit into one of these themes, it receives absolutely no funding. Period. Step 2. Risk appetite. You establish clear boundaries: financial, operational, and reputational, so you avoid reckless bets on one side, while preventing excessive caution and missed opportunities on the other. Step 3. Portfolio balance. You deliberately balance your investments across 3 categories: core, to defend and grow what makes money today; adjacent, to extend your current capabilities; and transformative, your bold bets on the future. This ensures you have the right risk-return profile. Step 4. Prioritization. This is where the real discipline happens. You ruthlessly score and rank every single initiative based on strategic fit, potential impact, and feasibility. Only the top-ranked projects get funded. Everything else is either killed or deferred without mercy. Step 5. Capital allocation. You deploy financial resources using strict stage-gate funding and introduce quarterly reallocation triggers. This way, capital always follows current priorities, never politics, and never historical budgets. Step 6. Resource allocation. Finally, you fiercely dedicate your absolute best people, their time, and the critical infrastructure exclusively to the most important funded projects. No more spreading your A-players across too many initiatives. Real-world organizations that applied this discipline saw dramatic results. Unilever used the allocation cascade to kill dozens of low-impact legacy contracts, freeing up 10 to 15% of its entire procurement spend. This money was immediately redirected into high-priority sustainability and supply chain transformation initiatives. Similarly, a major U.S. federal agency identified and eliminated outdated IT zombie projects that had been consuming budget for years. They successfully redirected 15 to 20% of their total budget toward critical modernization efforts and cybersecurity upgrades. Layer 6 forces every organization to make the hard, strict trade-offs that are necessary for true focus. Only then is the organization truly prepared and ready for the next layer. Layer 7. Execution. Now let's dive deep into how you can apply this powerful layer inside your own organization.
All right, we've journeyed through the first 5 layers of the strategic operating system: identity, direction, analysis, choice, and performance. Now we've arrived at layer 6, the absolute moment of truth: governance and allocation. This is it. This is the place where a brilliant strategy either gets the fuel it needs to take off, or it just withers and dies from a lack of resources. It's where all those great plans finally meet reality. You've probably seen this happen, right? A brilliant new strategy gets announced, there's a ton of excitement, and then a year later, absolutely nothing has changed. So why does this happen? Well, the breakdown often happens right here, in what we call governance and allocation. This is the moment of truth. It's where big ideas either get the fuel they need to become real, or they're just left to die on the vine. Let's dig into how to make sure your strategy actually gets funded. And the stakes here are just incredibly high. I mean, think about it. You can have the best strategy on the planet, but if you don't actually put your money and your people behind it, it's just a fancy document. You end up burning through your most valuable assets: your cash, the energy of your best people, and the one thing you can never, ever get back: time.
You know, this isn't just a small problem. This is the #1 reason most strategies completely fall flat. It's that classic peanut butter problem. You spread your resources so thinly across everything that nothing gets enough support to actually win. And we've all seen it. Those legacy zombie projects that just won't die, or someone's pet project. They keep getting funded year after year, sucking all the oxygen out of the room, while your most important new ideas are left to starve.
So how do we dodge that trap? Well, in this explainer, we're going to walk through a really clear 4-part journey. First, I'll introduce a framework called the Allocation Cascade. Then we'll talk about setting up your guardrails, the big picture rules. After that, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of actually committing the resources. And finally, we'll wrap up with your next move. Okay, so let's jump right into this framework, the Allocation Cascade. The best way to think about it is like a waterfall. It's a structured, logical flow that takes you from that high-level strategic vision, way up in the clouds, all the way down to a specific team with a specific budget working on a real project. Now, this cascade has 6 key steps. We start really broad with things like defining your strategic themes and your investment portfolio. Then we start to narrow things down with ruthless prioritization. And only then, at the very end, do we actually allocate the money and the people. See how each step builds on the last? It's a system designed to force discipline. So these first 3 steps, I like to call them setting your guardrails. This is the foundational work you absolutely have to do before you spend a single dollar. It's about defining the rules of the game ahead of time so your decisions are strategic and disciplined, not just based on who has the most political clout. Guardrail number 1 is to establish your strategic themes. Just think of these as the 3 to 5 big investment buckets where you've decided to focus. These flow right out of your main strategy, and they come with a really simple, powerful rule. If a new idea or project doesn't fit into one of these themes, it doesn't get funded, period. It's your first and most important filter. And just to be clear, these can't be vague, fluffy statements. They need to be real investment areas. So for example, your themes might be something like accelerate digital transformation or strengthen our core customer relationships. When you're this specific, you're sending a crystal clear signal to the entire organization about what really matters. Okay, the next guardrail is about building a portfolio view. This is just a way of grouping all your projects together to make sure you have the right balance. Are you playing it way too safe, only funding your existing business? Or are you maybe betting the entire company on a few risky moonshots? A portfolio view makes that answer really obvious. And this is a great way to visualize that balance, the 70-20-10 model. The idea here is that maybe 70% of your bets go into your core business, the stuff that pays the bills today. Then 20% goes into adjacent areas like new products. And that last 10%, that's for the big, transformative bets on the future. A simple chart like this tells you in a heartbeat if your investment mix is out of whack. Our third and final guardrail is defining your risk appetite. Now, this isn't about avoiding risk. It's about being really explicit and honest about how much risk you're willing to take on. This protects you from 2 things: making reckless bets that could kill the company, and being so cautious that you stifle every innovative idea. And this has to be translated into real, hard rules, not just a feeling. For instance, a company might say, a maximum of 15% of our budget can go to high-risk projects. That creates a clear, undeniable line in the sand that guides the whole allocation process. Okay, with our guardrails firmly in place, we are ready for the action phase. This is where the rubber meets the road. We're going to turn all those big picture rules into actual funded projects. And this stage kicks off with a word that is brutally difficult in practice: prioritization. And I use the word ruthless here on purpose. To avoid that peanut butter trap, you have to score every single potential project against clear, objective criteria. Because if you don't have a system, you know who wins? The loudest person in the room. Every time. So, how do you do it? With a simple scoring framework, like the one you see here. You just rate each initiative on a few key criteria. How well does it fit our strategy? What's the potential impact? How hard is it to actually pull off? What you get is a data-driven, ranked list. The stuff at the top gets funded, the stuff at the bottom gets cut. It replaces messy opinions with clean data. Now, once you have that prioritized list, the next step, capital allocation, becomes way, way simpler. You just deploy the money according to the rankings. This gets us to a mantra you should write down. Capital follows priority. Not history, not politics, and definitely not personalities. Capital follows priority. But here's a key point. This is not a set-it-and-forget-it activity you do once a year. It has to be a living, breathing process. Sure, you'll have your annual budget, but you also need more flexible tools. Things like stage-gate funding, where a project gets a little bit of money to prove itself before it gets the big investment, are absolutely critical. And you need regular check-ins, maybe every quarter, to shift money around as the world changes. And that brings us to the final and, frankly, the most critical step of all: resource allocation. This is about deploying your people, their time, and your key infrastructure. And I really want to pause on this because for most of us, our top talent and their focus is way more scarce and valuable than our cash. The rules here are simple to say but require incredible discipline to actually do. First, you have to put your best people, your A players, on your most important A-level projects. No excuses. Second, you have to be willing to pull people off lower-value work and move them to where they can make the biggest impact. It means you have to allocate your talent with the same rigor you allocate your money.
And there you have it. That's the entire allocation cascade. It's a complete system for turning your strategy into a funded reality through disciplined commitment. So, the big question is, what's your next move?
With this final piece of the puzzle locked in, we've now built out a complete 6-layer strategic operating system. We've gone all the way from the high-level why of your organization's identity down to the nitty-gritty mechanics of how you actually fund it. You now have the full blueprint. Which brings me to one last, provocative question for you to take back to your team. If you were to apply this disciplined thinking tomorrow, what is the biggest zombie project still shambling around your organization? You know the one I'm talking about, the project that everyone knows is dead but it keeps getting funded, eating up resources. Finding it and killing it is the first step to freeing up everything you need for the work that truly matters.
Learning reinforcement. The Allocation Cascade Engineering Organizational Focus.
Companies spend millions of dollars and thousands of hours engineering brilliant strategic plans, only to watch them shatter when they meet the real world. The collapse rarely stems from a flawed core idea. Execution fails because organizations spread their resources too thin across competing priorities, and they operate without clear risk boundaries. This lack of discipline breeds the zombie project. A zombie project is a legacy initiative that survives and drains talent, time, and money simply because no one has the authority to kill it. An unfunded strategy is merely a corporate hallucination. Real, measurable intent only exists when it is backed by disciplined financial commitment. This brings us to layer 6 of the strategic operating system, governance and allocation. This is the ruthless arena where priorities are either funded to succeed or aggressively killed to protect the rest of the organization from dilution. Strong governance is the mechanical filter that forces alignment between every physical dollar spent and the specific logic you use to win in the market. The Allocation Cascade is a 6-step filtration system, forcing abstract strategy into concrete deployment. At the top are strategic themes. These 3 to 5 macro investment buckets dictate where capital strictly flows, like digital transformation or supply chain resilience. The rule here is absolute. If an initiative does not fit inside one of these specific buckets, it gets 0 funding. Step 2 requires a balanced portfolio, grouping investments into 3 risk-return categories: core, adjacent, and transformative. Step 3 sets risk appetite, establishing strict financial boundaries, like capping high-risk bets at 15%, preventing reckless bets and crippling overcaution. These first 3 layers act as macro guardrails, ensuring only the ideas strictly aligned with your ambition and risk tolerance survive the initial drop. Tier 4 is prioritization, an analytical meat grinder. Surviving initiatives are aggressively scored on strategic fit, value, and feasibility. The filtration is harsh. Top-ranked initiatives survive, while the bottom-ranked are ruthlessly killed or deferred. Step 5 is capital allocation. Money is committed through stage-gate funding, small initial budgets for proof of concept that only unlock scaling capital by proving value. Finally, resource allocation governs deployment of infrastructure, time, and top-tier human talent. The driving principle here is simple but frequently ignored. Organizations must fiercely assign their absolute best A players to their most critical A projects. Surviving the entire cascade guarantees that every physical resource is now bound exclusively to a strategic imperative. This is the state of disciplined commitment. Every dollar and hour strictly drives the organization's winning logic, operating seamlessly to push the business forward. Strong governance and rigorous allocation protect the organization against dilution, distraction, and the common trap of spreading resources too thin. Take a hard look at your own organization. What is the biggest zombie project still getting funded today? Let's call them out in the comments below. Identifying these failures is the absolute foundation required before we move to the final step of the strategic operating system, Layer 7, Execution.
Case studies.
Welcome. Today, we're diving into that critical, often painful moment where a brilliant strategy meets the cold, hard reality of budgets and people. We're talking about governance and allocation. This is the exact spot where your amazing plans either get the fuel they need to fly or just quietly wither on the vine.
And this, right here, is the make or break moment. Seriously. You can have the most insightful strategy in the world, but if you don't allocate resources with real discipline, you're just wasting everything. Most strategies don't fail because the idea was bad. They fail right here, at the moment of execution and funding.
So here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we'll talk about something called the allocation trap. Then, we'll walk through a powerful framework to get out of it, the Allocation Cascade. After that, we'll see it in action with two totally different case studies, Unilever and a government agency. And we'll wrap it all up with the core commitment you have to make for this to work.
Okay, first up, let's really dig into the problem, the allocation trap. This is that dangerous disconnect between what leaders say is important and where the money, people, and time actually go. It's a subtle gap, but trust me, it is absolutely deadly for any strategic plan.
Do these sound familiar? Yeah, I thought so. Spreading your budget so thin it's like a single layer of peanut butter on too much bread just so no one gets upset. Or, keeping that old legacy project on life support because, well, we've just always done it. And of course, letting office politics or history decide the budget instead of logic. Every single one of these dilutes your focus and just drains energy from the things that truly matter.
So how in the world do you escape this trap? You need a system. And that brings us to the Allocation Cascade. It's a framework really designed to bring some ruthless logic and discipline to the whole process, turning those high-level goals into on-the-ground reality.
Think of this cascade like a funnel, one that's designed to force clarity. It starts out really broad with your big-picture strategic themes, and it gets more and more specific with each step. You define your portfolio of investments, you set your risk appetite, and then, and only then, do you get down to prioritization, capital allocation, and finally, resource allocation. Each step builds on the last, forcing a deliberate trade-off and making sure you've got alignment from the very top to the very bottom.
All right, let's see how this framework actually works in the real world. Theory is great, but the proof is in the pudding. Our first stop is a massive global player in the consumer goods space.
So try to picture this scene at a company like Unilever. They're dealing with huge supply chain disruptions. They've got these old contracts for things that just aren't a priority anymore. We call those zombie contracts. And a whole bunch of well-meaning projects that were actually pulling the company in way too many directions at once. They needed to get focused and fast.
So what was step one? They set up just a few powerful strategic themes to act as big investment buckets. Then they applied this beautifully simple and frankly brutal rule. If a project didn't directly fit into one of those themes, it got zero funding, period. Instantly, anything that didn't serve a core strategic goal was off the table. Next, they visualized their entire portfolio. And wow, this chart tells the story, doesn't it? They realized they were spending way too much protecting their old, safe core business, and not nearly enough on the big, transformative bets they needed to make for the future. Just seeing this forced a really tough conversation and a major reallocation of funds toward real innovation.
And the results? By setting clear risk boundaries, like for example, making sure no single supplier made up too much of their critical materials, they cut their overall supply risk exposure by a massive 30%. Now that's what building real resilience looks like.
And what about those zombie contracts we talked about? By finally killing them off, they freed up 10 to 15% of their entire procurement spend. That's a huge amount of capital that they could immediately pump back into the projects that did align with their new strategic themes.
Now, just to prove this isn't some corporate-only trick, let's look at a completely different world. A U.S. federal agency. You can just imagine the challenges here. Super tight budgets, incredible inertia, and constant political pressure.
The environment is totally different, but look, the problem is exactly the same. Money was just flowing to these outdated IT systems simply because it always had. The really important modernization projects were starved for cash, and you had these pet projects from influential leaders that were just draining resources from mission-critical work.
This slide really shows the dramatic shift. On the left, you see the chaos of the old way, and on the right, you see the discipline that the allocation cascade brings. They stopped automatic renewals, they put their best IT people, their A players, only on their A projects, and maybe most importantly, funding decisions started being driven by data, not by who had the most political pull.
And the outcome here was just as impressive. By applying this discipline, the agency was able to redirect 15 to 20% of its entire budget away from those zombie legacy projects and into high-impact modernization and cybersecurity. They were literally delivering better results for citizens without a single extra dollar in their budget. So, let's wrap this all up. The real takeaway here is that allocation isn't just some financial exercise you do once a year. It's the ultimate test of your commitment to your strategy. It's the place where your intent truly becomes reality.
And this is what it all boils down to: allocation discipline. And notice that word, ruthless. This isn't a one-time thing. It's an ongoing system to protect your strategy from the thousands of tiny distractions and little compromises that try to water it down every single day.
So why does this really matter to you? Because a framework like this forces you to make tough choices. It gives you the air cover you need to kill the projects that are holding you back. It makes sure every single resource is aimed squarely at your most important goals. And it guarantees your very best people are working on your most critical challenges.
And that leaves us with one final question for you to chew on. Just look around your own workplace, your own team. What's the biggest zombie project that's still shambling along, consuming time and money that could be used to build the future? Now that is something worth thinking about.
Working slides.